Hey guys, tonight we're heading somewhere warm. So warm that you can practically feel the sun baked into the stones beneath your feet, even after dark. The air is soft and heavy with the scent of river water and something faintly sweet. Maybe honey, maybe figs, maybe a kind of pastry you've never tasted but are already sure you'd like. Out there, the Nile slides past like a strip of liquid moonlight, carrying whispers from villages upstream and down. Somewhere, a boatman hums under his breath. Somewhere else, a papyrus lamp flickers in the wind, casting little shivers of gold across the black water. You wouldn't survive 5 minutes here without sweating through whatever loose linen robe you could find. Yes, you'd look great, but you'd also be regretting every step. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and the time where you are, bonus points if you're already in your pajamas. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing on the worn wooden dock, toes just brushing the Nile's edge. The moon above isn't in a hurry. It's hanging low, glowing through a thin haze, and it feels like it's been watching this river for thousands of years. You can hear the gentle lap of the water against the reeds, the occasional plop of a fish breaking the surface. It's not the kind of place that tries to impress you with noise. It just exists. And that's the impressive part. Tonight's wind is lazy, brushing against your skin like a hand that knows you're already half asleep. Somewhere across the river, there's laughter, muffled, warm, drifting toward you on the air. Maybe it's from a gathering, maybe from a couple sitting close, sharing a secret. That's the thing about the Nile, even in the quiet, it carries pieces of other people's lives right to your feet. You take a few steps along the dock, feeling it creak softly. The planks smell faintly of pitch and river plants, both timeless and oddly comforting. To your left, tied up at the bank, a narrow boat rocks gently. Its oar rests along the side, worn smooth by decades of hands. An empty basket sits inside, and you wonder, was it for fish? Grain? Or maybe for a box of pastries, sent from one shore to the other under cover of night. The river's been a witness to everything here: trade, war, peace, and yes, love. Love that was scrawled on papyrus and sealed with a dab of sticky resin. Love that smelled faintly of cinnamon or honey. You picture a letter rolled tight, tucked into a jar, and nestled beside a warm pastry so the scent would mingle. It's almost ridiculous, and yet it makes perfect sense. A night like this isn't just for sleeping. It's for remembering. For imagining the lives of people who stood exactly where you stand now, 1,000 years before the first light bulb, or train, or smartphone ever existed. People who had their own inside jokes, their own awkward pauses, their own way of saying, "I miss you," without saying it out loud. Sometimes, that way involved dessert. The water glints silver as you lean on the railing. In the shadows, a heron stands so still it could be carved from stone. You can hear the brush of reeds swaying, the low rustle of palm fronds. And beneath it all, the slow heartbeat of the Nile. It's been here long before you. It'll be here long after. But for this moment, it's just you, the river, and the first chapter of a story you didn't even know you were part of. You imagine taking a small boat out into the center of the current, letting it carry you. No paddling, no steering, just letting the river decide where you'll end up. The stars would shift above you, the banks sliding past like pages in a book. Maybe you'd pass a fisherman heading home, or a trader ferrying jars of oil. Or maybe, just maybe, you'd drift by another soul with the same idea, their boat heavy with letters and pastries destined for someone waiting downriver. And you nod to each other, as if to say, yeah, we both know. Somewhere upriver, the faint beat of a drum starts, a slow, steady rhythm. You can't tell if it's from a celebration, a ritual, or just someone trying to keep themselves awake. But it fits. It's the sound of this place's heartbeat, keeping time while the river keeps secrets. You breathe it in, the warmth, the sense, the steady hush of water. And in that moment you can feel it, the pull of stories older than language, carried here by the same current that's brushing against your toes. You take one last look at the moonlit water before turning toward the narrow path that leads into the heart of the settlement. The sound of the river fades, replaced by the distant murmur of voices and the occasional burst of laughter. Somewhere ahead, someone is baking. The air is touched with a sweetness that's impossible to ignore. You follow it, because of course you do. And just like that, the first breadcrumb in a trail of ancient pastry-scented history has found you. You slip into the narrow lanes between mud-brick houses, the air still warm from the day. Every step kicks up a faint dust that clings to your sandals and makes you think about how no matter the century, shoes are always a little disappointing in hot weather. Somewhere to your right, a clay oven is glowing from within, and the smell, oh, that smell, wraps itself around you like a scarf you didn't know you wanted. It's not just bread. It's sweeter, richer. A hint of honey, the mellow depth of dates, maybe even the buttery whisper of sesame oil. Your stomach reacts first, but your mind follows quickly. This is the very scent you caught earlier from the river bank, folded neatly into the night like a secret waiting to be unfolded. You round a corner and find yourself in front of a low stall with an awning patched from different bits of woven cloth. The baker is there, a woman with arms strong from kneading dough since before sunrise. She glances up at you briefly, as though she's seen you 100 times before in 100 dreams, then goes back to sliding small round pastries from a flat stone with a paddle worn thin. She doesn't greet you with words, just with the sound of crust crackling as it cools. You get closer, drawn by that scent, and that's when you notice, each pastry is wrapped in a thin strip of papyrus. Not like a bakery label, not with prices or ingredients. No, these are written on. In delicate, careful strokes of ink. Your curiosity trips over itself. You've heard whispers of this before, how in the days of the Pharaohs, lovers would sometimes send notes, not just with flowers or jewelry, but with something edible. Something the recipient could taste while they read. Words and flavors mixing, one feeding the heart and the other the tongue. You glance at one of the rolls on the tray. The papyrus strip says something you can't quite read. Your ancient Egyptian is rusty, after all, but you can tell by the loops and curls of the writing that it's personal. And possibly, daring. The baker catches you staring. They're not all for sale, she says, voice low, like the night itself might be listening. Some of these are for delivery. She gestures to a small basket behind her. It's lined with soft linen and already has 3 pastries resting inside, each with its own strip of writing. She leans toward you conspiratorially. For a certain scribe down by the river, she says, eyes twinkling. Though the sender asked me not to say. You wonder about this scribe. Does he sit under the moon, reading each note with sticky fingers? Does he bite into the pastry before finishing the last word? Does the scent of honey cling to the papyrus after the pastry is gone? The baker starts telling you a story, her hands never stopping their work. She says that sometimes the letters are poems, sometimes jokes, sometimes tiny little complaints, about the heat, about a neighbor, about the price of cumin. She laughs at that one. Even love needs a little spice, she says. But here's the thing. The Egyptians took their food seriously. Bread was life, but pastries were luxury. And luxury, wrapped around words, was more than a gift, it was a declaration. Like saying, you are worth the extra honey. You are worth the imported cinnamon. You ask her if this happens often? She nods. Often enough that the Pharaoh's own couriers sometimes pretend not to see. As long as it's harmless. She shrugs, sliding another pastry from the oven. And sometimes it's not harmless. Sometimes it changes everything. There's a beat of silence between you as she works. The heat from the oven feels like it's trying to tattoo your skin. You think about how this small tradition, part baking, part writing, part risk, could outlast empires. A group of children runs past, one clutching a folded scrap of papyrus. You catch a few words as they call to each other, something about a sweetheart, and a honey loaf. They disappear into the darkness, their laughter bouncing between the walls. The baker slides a warm pastry toward you. No papyrus this time, just a golden crust, shining faintly in the lamplight. You take it, feeling the soft give of the bread beneath your fingers. It smells like almonds and something floral you can't name. Eat, she says simply. You bite into it, and the flavor blooms instantly, sweet, but not cloying. The texture is soft, the crust just shy of crisp. Somewhere in the middle, a tiny burst of date paste. You close your eyes. You could almost imagine reading a letter while eating this, the words melting into the flavor until they become inseparable. And suddenly you understand why someone might risk a palace guard's suspicion just to send a note wrapped around a pastry. Because taste is memory, and memory is love's favorite trick. You finish the last bite, licking your fingers before you realize you've done it. The baker is already turning back to her work, but she says over her shoulder, "If you want to know more, go to the market in Thebes at dawn. That's where the stories start." And just like that, you know where you're going next. The night fades without much fuss, like a candle burning down to its stub. By the time you leave the baker's lane, the sky has taken on that soft gray that means dawn is thinking about showing up but hasn't quite committed. You walk toward the docks, the air cooler now, brushing away the memory of the oven's heat from your skin. A few riverboats are already creaking under the weight of their cargo, amphorae, sacks of grain, bundles of papyrus reeds, and the boatmen look like they've been awake since last week. Your ride to Thebes is nothing fancy. A long, narrow skiff with a single square sail, patched in places with fabric that looks suspiciously like it was repurposed from someone's old tunic. The boatman is quiet, his hands working the ropes without needing to look. You take a seat, feeling the river sway beneath you. The Nile at this hour is silver blue, calm but alive, the surface occasionally breaking into little ripples as if it's whispering to itself. The journey upriver is slow enough to let your thoughts wander. You picture Thebes not as it is, but as it must look from above, a sprawl of streets radiating out from the temples, each one tangled with vendors, children, stray dogs, and gossip that moves faster than the current. You wonder if the pastries and love letters custom is common there too, or if Thebes, being bigger, has turned it into something more elaborate. The first sight of the market hits you before you even step ashore. It's a sound, layers of it. Merchants calling prices in voices trained to cut through chaos, the clatter of pottery being shifted from one stall to another, the high-pitched bargaining tones of customers pretending they might walk away. Somewhere in the mix, a flute is playing a tune so airy it's almost swallowed by the noise, like the market itself is exhaling music. You step onto the packed earth, and the smells come at you next: cumin, coriander, smoke from roasting chickpeas, the tang of freshly cut onions, the sharp kick of garlic. And there, threading through it all like a secret, you catch the sweetness. The pastry stalls are easy to spot. Not because they're big, but because they draw little clusters of people leaning in close, not just to buy but to talk. You edge toward one stall where a young man in a flour-dusted tunic is arranging little pyramids of pastries on a reed mat. The pastries are round and glossy, each one wrapped in a thin strip of papyrus. You pick one up, not to buy, just to look, and the young man immediately says, "Careful, that one's not for sale." His eyes flick to a woman waiting nearby, who's pretending to examine a basket of figs but is very obviously watching him. He lowers his voice. "For her husband. He's away with the army." He glances at her again. "She sends him one every week. Writes to him about the neighbors, the garden, the new cat. Always tucks in a little joke so he doesn't get too serious." You put the pastry down gently, as though it might crumble under too much attention. Around you, the market thrums. A man selling pomegranates boasts about how his fruit is sweeter than the ones from the next stall. A woman in a bright blue headscarf shouts the price of sesame cakes like she's daring you not to buy them. Kids weave between legs, laughing, their arms full of warm bread to take home. And yet, when you pay attention, the love letters are everywhere. A small, knobby loaf with neat handwriting along the crust. A thin biscuit wrapped in linen with a note stitched into the edge. Even a jar of honey with a tiny papyrus scroll tied to its neck. One vendor catches your curiosity. An older man with a stall piled high with flat pastries dusted with something pale. He grins at you, showing a row of teeth that look like they've seen better days. "For lovers," he says, as though that explains everything. You ask him why pastries are so often the chosen medium for affection here. He chuckles. "Because words dry out. Paper fades. But memory tastes like something. You eat the gift, and it stays with you." He taps his temple. "Here." Then he taps his chest. "And here." A bell rings somewhere deep in the market, and for a moment the sound rises above the noise like a seagull catching a sudden gust. People start shifting toward the main square, where a storyteller is unrolling a large piece of linen painted with scenes from a recent festival. The older man leans toward you. "Go listen. He knows the one about the pastry and the vizier's daughter. That's worth hearing." You follow the crowd, weaving between stalls, brushing past baskets of lemons and mounds of chickpeas. The storyteller stands tall, his linen stretched out for everyone to see. The painted figures are mid-motion, dancers with arms arched overhead, musicians frozen in the act of playing, tables set with food so vivid you almost want to reach out and take some. As he begins, you realize this is more than entertainment. It's how the market remembers. The stories told here have legs. They walk from one ear to another, change shape, pick up details, and sometimes, like a well-loved recipe, become something richer in the retelling. You catch the first lines. "In the days when the river ran high and the gods smiled on Thebes, there was a pastry that carried more danger than a blade." And just like that, the market isn't just about food anymore. It's about the messages hidden inside. The storyteller's voice wraps around you like the scent of warm dough, pulling you closer into the circle. His hands paint the air as he speaks, each gesture carrying the weight of 100 retellings. He begins with the vizier's daughter, radiant, of course, though in the storyteller's version her eyes are the color of dates soaked in wine, and her laugh could make the Nile forget to flow. She lived in the palace, surrounded by servants, scribes, and guards who treated her like a piece of glass. Which, you can imagine, must have been exhausting. Enter the royal baker. Not the kind who makes everyday bread for the palace staff. This was the personal baker, the one trusted to create delicate little sweetmeats for the Pharaoh himself. His hands were dusted perpetually in flour, his apron was a battlefield of sugar stains, and his knowledge of spices could make a merchant weep with envy. One morning, while delivering a tray of honey-filled dumplings for the royal breakfast, the baker happened to pass through the vizier's courtyard. She was there, feeding crumbs to a pigeon, and their eyes met, because that's how stories like this always start. No words, just that lingering glance that somehow says everything and nothing at once. The storyteller leans forward, lowering his voice like he's about to share a crime. You see, in those days, speaking openly to the vizier's daughter was unwise. Especially if you were a baker. The crowd chuckles, and you find yourself smiling too. So, the baker did what bakers do best. He let the pastries talk for him. He began sending her tiny almond cakes, each one wrapped in papyrus with a line of poetry inked in careful script. Not obvious love poems. Oh no, that would have been too dangerous. Instead, he wrote about the Nile's current, the scent of lotus flowers, the taste of fresh dates in spring. The kind of things that could be passed off as harmless musings, unless you knew how to read between the lines. The storyteller's hands mimic the wrapping of a pastry, folding invisible papyrus. She always knew, he says with a wink. She knew from the very first bite. Weeks passed. The pastries grew more elaborate, little spirals of dough brushed with honey, dusted with sesame seeds imported from far-off lands. The poems grew bolder too, though never so bold as to get him thrown into the Nile. He compared her laughter to the sound of pomegranate seeds tumbling into a bowl. He described the way her presence felt like the first breeze after a long, hot day. And then, the twist. The Pharaoh requested the baker to prepare pastries for the annual banquet, a feast where every noble in Thebes would be present, including, of course, the vizier's daughter. The baker saw his chance. He prepared a single pastry, unlike any other on the table. Inside, hidden beneath layers of sweet dough, he placed a scrap of papyrus with just 5 words, "Meet me by the river." He set it on the tray nearest her seat, then stepped back into the kitchen to wait, heart pounding. The storyteller pauses here, letting the crowd hold its breath. You can almost hear the banquet hall in your mind, the clink of cups, the shuffle of sandals on stone, the soft sigh of silk garments. And then, the moment she bites into it. She found the note, the storyteller says, and she smiled. Not the polite smile of a noblewoman, but the kind of smile that makes you forget where you are. That night, she slipped away from the palace, her sandals barely whispering against the path to the river. The baker was there, holding not another pastry but a small bundle, a cloak, a water skin, and enough bread for a journey. They didn't run away exactly, but they didn't return by morning either. Some say they vanished upriver, settling in a village where no one cared who her father was. Others claim the vizier found them and brought her back, though she never married. And a few insist that the Pharaoh himself, amused by the romance, gave them a small estate where they lived out their days baking together. The storyteller shrugs, grinning. Who's to say which is true? Perhaps all of them. Perhaps none. But one thing is certain. He holds up an imaginary pastry. Since that day, every baker in Thebes knows that sometimes, a little sweetness can change the course of a life. The crowd claps softly, not the raucous kind of applause, but the warm approval reserved for a story well told. People drift back to the stalls, the air filling once again with the market's hum. You linger, though. The image of the royal baker stays with you, not just his skill, but the quiet daring it must have taken to speak without speaking. You imagine the heat of the palace kitchens, the weight of secrecy in every fold of dough, the knowledge that each bite might be the one that gives everything away. As you wander, you pass a young baker arranging honey loaves on a tray. For a moment you could swear you catch a glint in his eyes, the same kind of glint the storyteller just described. You wonder what words might be hiding under that golden crust. The market thins as the day grows hotter, the vendors pulling their awnings lower to keep the sun from bleaching their wares. You follow a narrow lane toward the palace district, where the streets are quieter, the walls higher, and the air carries that faint resin scent of cedar doors. Here, voices drop to a murmur, and footsteps seem to echo longer than they should. It's at the corner of a wide courtyard that you find the place, less a room, more a sanctuary for paper and ink. The palace's Permedjat, its letter house. The walls are lined with niches stacked high with scrolls, each wrapped in linen strips and sealed with wax. The air is cool and dry, smelling of papyrus and faintly of beeswax candles. And unexpectedly, there's something else in the mix. A warm sweetness, almost floral, like honey mixed with crushed petals. You step inside, and your sandals scuff against the stone floor, drawing the gaze of a man bent over a table. He's middle-aged, with ink stains on his fingers and the patient, careful eyes of someone who has spent decades guarding other people's words. His reed pen rests beside a shallow dish of ink, and behind him is a small shelf, filled not with scrolls, but with little ceramic jars. He follows your gaze. "Ah," he says, smiling faintly. "The jars. Yes, you've smelled them already." He gestures for you to come closer. "These hold the letters that arrived with gifts." You peer at one of the jars. Inside, rolled tightly, is a strip of papyrus. The lid is sealed with resin, but you can see flecks of something golden clinging to the edges. "They came with pastries," the man explains. "Some couriers don't like to mix food with official correspondence, but well, we're not always strict here." He lowers his voice conspiratorially. "Sometimes a letter sent is part of its meaning." You imagine unsealing one of those jars weeks later, the smell of baked honey still clinging to the paper, mingling with the words. A love letter that hasn't just been read, it's been tasted. The archivist, because that's what he must be, begins telling you about his work. "Some letters we keep for the record," he says, "because their senders or recipients are important to the court. Others, we keep because they're curious." He points to one jar in particular. "That one arrived 20 years ago. We've opened it only once. Still smells of cinnamon." You ask him if he's ever read a letter that made him jealous. He laughs, shaking his head. "More than one. But I am content to be their keeper. It's like holding on to someone's favorite song. You don't need to sing it yourself to enjoy it." He lifts a scroll from the table and carefully rolls it open. The ink is deep black, the handwriting elegant but quick. "This," he says, "is from a soldier to his betrothed. He describes the march north, the dust, the heat. Then," he points to a short line halfway down, "he mentions a loaf she once sent him. Says the smell carried him home in his mind, if not in his feet." You can almost hear the soldier's voice in those words, almost taste the bread. It's the kind of thing that makes history feel smaller, like you could reach back and shake the man's hand. The archivist leans back, considering you. "You know," he says, The Pharaoh himself receives pastries with notes sometimes. Not love notes, at least not in the romantic sense, but tributes from distant towns, recipes meant to impress. One even came from a city that claimed to grow the sweetest figs in Egypt. The letter was short: taste and judge. He chuckles. His Majesty approved. You glance at the shelves again, at all the sealed scrolls and jars. They're like little bottled moments, each holding not just a message but the atmosphere of its journey, the dust, the hands that carried it, the kitchen it cooled in. Somewhere deep in the room, you hear the soft scuttle of a mouse. The archivist doesn't flinch. They know better than to chew the letters, he says. The resin tastes terrible. He pauses, then grins. The pastries, though, they've tried those. You can't help but laugh, picturing a tiny mouse dragging off an ancient almond tart meant for a noble's sweetheart. Before you leave, the archivist offers you one last glimpse, a jar he's never opened since it arrived. It's small, the resin seal unbroken, and the papyrus inside is stained a faint golden brown. The sender never told us what was written, he says. The recipient never came to claim it. Some things stayed between the paper and the pastry. As you step back into the sunlight, the scent of honey and ink clings to you, mingling with the dust of the courtyard. You realize you've just been in the room where love, sweet, sticky, and fragile, has been quietly preserved for centuries. The palace walls give way to an open slope that leads straight down to the river, and by the time you reach the bottom, the world smells different, cooler, wetter, touched with the faint mineral scent of clay jars cooling in the shade. The sun has climbed high enough now that the Nile's surface is a sheet of rippling gold, and everything it touches seems to glow. That's when you see it, a cluster of broad canopies pitched along the water's edge, the fabric billowing lazily in the breeze. Beneath them, long low tables have been set with trays of food, baskets of fruit, amphorae of wine, and yes, more pastries than you've ever seen in one place outside of a dream. The hum of voices is low and rhythmic, the kind of sound that carries the mood of a gathering before it even carries the words. A servant passes by with a jug of pomegranate wine, and you catch the bright tang of it on the air. Just beyond him, a woman in a deep green linen dress is arranging plates on the largest table. She catches your curious look and waves you closer. Not just a feast, she says with a smile. This is a banquet by the river. The nobles do it every year. Some for trade, some for politics. Her smile turns sly. And some for reasons you can't write down without getting in trouble. You glance over the spread. At first, the pastries look like decoration, small, perfect, each one different from the last. But when you look closer, you notice a pattern. Each pastry is paired with a folded strip of papyrus, some tucked underneath, some laid carefully across the top. The writing is neat, deliberate. These, she explains, are messages. Sometimes a toast in words, sometimes a request. Sometimes, she lowers her voice just enough for you to lean in, a private exchange disguised as dessert. She picks one up, a little dome of honey dough sprinkled with crushed pistachio, and gestures toward a man across the table. That one's for him. From her. She nods toward a woman in a gold collar, who's pretending to watch the musicians but is clearly stealing glances in the man's direction. You can't help but imagine the moment later when he bites into it, how the sweetness will mix with the words, how the taste will anchor the memory. The musicians strike up something light, their flutes and lutes weaving together over the low thump of a drum. Guests begin to wander, lifting cups, sampling fruit, trading polite greetings that you suspect hide much livelier subtext. One man, a broad-shouldered merchant with the kind of rings that clink when he gestures, leans toward a noblewoman and says something you can't hear. She laughs, shaking her head, then reaches for one of the pastries. Instead of eating it, she slips the papyrus into her palm and tucks it away in the folds of her dress. You wander between tables, the breeze carrying both the river's cool breath and the warm perfume of spices. There's a plate of pastries shaped like small birds, their wings dusted with cinnamon. Another platter holds little spirals stuffed with fig paste so dark they look like polished wood. At one table, a scribe is jotting down the running tally of dishes served, and you catch him smirking as he notes a particular batch. That, he mutters, is going to start trouble. When you ask why, he points to a group of 3 men laughing together, except one of them has just pocketed a pastry meant for another. You'll see, the scribe says, eyes twinkling. It strikes you that this banquet isn't just about food. It's about exchange. The wine, the fruit, the bread, they're the public part. But the pastries and their notes, that's the undercurrent. That's where the real talk happens. A servant offers you one, and you hesitate before accepting. It's small, round, its crust brushed with something glossy. You turn it over and find a papyrus strip tucked underneath, blank on the side you can see. You almost open it, but decide to leave the mystery intact. Not every message is meant for you, after all. The afternoon drifts on, the sun tilting westward. Laughter grows warmer, the air thicker with the scent of wine and honey. From where you stand, you can see the river's far bank turning to shadow, and it occurs to you that the Nile has been the silent witness to countless scenes like this, where alliances are forged, flirtations are tested, and history is sweetened before being swallowed. As you step away from the table, the woman in the green dress passes by again, balancing a tray. Careful, she says with a knowing smile. You never know when a bite might change your life. And in this place, with this much sweetness in the air, you believe her. The river breeze follows you inland again, winding through narrow stone corridors until you step into a courtyard shaded by a woven reed canopy. Here, the noise of the banquet fades to a soft, faraway murmur, replaced by the steady scratch of a reed pen on papyrus. At a low table sits a man in a faded linen tunic, hunched slightly, his hand moving with a rhythm that's almost hypnotic. His tools are simple: a shallow ink dish, a bundle of sharpened pens, and a stack of thin papyrus sheets weighted at the corners with small stones. You can smell the ink before you get close, sharp, resinous, with a faint sweetness like myrrh. He looks up briefly, his eyes calm but sharp, the kind that register more than they let on. You're not here for official letters, he says, not as a question but as an observation. I can tell by the way you're watching the pen, not the words. You admit he's right, and he smiles. Then you must be after the other kind. The kind the palace doesn't catalog. He gestures toward a small basket beside his desk. Inside are rolled strips of papyrus, each one tied with a thread dyed a different color. Some are pale blue, others gold, a few deep red. Each color means something different, he explains. Blue for longing, gold for celebration, red for, well. His smile turns sly. You can guess. You pick up a blue-tied roll and notice a faint, dried stain at the edge, sticky, faintly fragrant. Honey. He confirms it with a nod. Some senders dab a corner with syrup or crushed dates. A scent to travel with the words. As he works, he tells you about his unusual job. I'm a copyist of the heart, he says, dipping his pen. When someone wants to send a love letter but lacks the skill, or the courage, they come to me. I write their words as if they were my own. You asked if he ever improves on what they tell him. His grin is immediate. Always. A letter is like pastry dough, it needs a certain texture. Too plain, and it falls flat. Too heavy, and it's hard to swallow. I add a little spice, a little sweetness. He pulls a fresh sheet toward him and begins writing without looking up, his voice carrying the story of a recent commission. There was a fisherman, he says, who fell for a potter's daughter. He brought me a basket of river prawns as payment, asked me to write her something that would make her laugh. The letter began innocently enough, compliments about her work, her smile, the way her hair caught the light. But in the final lines he compared her hands to the feel of warm bread just out of the oven. She came to the market the next day, the scribe says, and bought prawns from him. They'd been married a year now. You watch his hand move over the page, the letters flowing like the Nile itself. The trick, he murmurs, is to make the reader hungry, not just for food, but for the sender. The basket beside him rustles, and he plucks out a red-tied roll. This one, he says, lowering his voice, was smuggled into the palace kitchen this morning. The baker who receives it will know exactly who sent it. No one else would dare mention almond paste and kissing in the same sentence. You laugh quietly, imagining the moment the baker unrolls it, the ink still smelling faintly of the scribe's ink dish. From somewhere beyond the courtyard comes the clink of plates, the flutter of a linen awning in the breeze. But here, it's just you, the scribe, and the sound of history being coaxed onto paper. Before you leave, he slides a small scrap toward you. On it, a single line in flowing script, some words are meant to be eaten. He tucks it into your palm without waiting for a reply. As you step back into the sun, the murmur of the banquet picks up again in your ears, but the scribe's quiet grin lingers in your mind. And you can't help wondering, if he wrote for you, what would he say? By late afternoon, the heat has softened into something gentler, the light turning that deep honey gold that makes even the dust look romantic. You wander away from the palace district, following the winding streets until the grand walls give way to humbler clay brick houses. The air changes here, less incense, more wood smoke, and the warm, nutty smell of grain roasting somewhere nearby. You pass a row of small workshops, a weaver knotting fringe onto a linen shawl, a cooper hammering metal bands around a half-finished barrel, and finally, a potter bent over his wheel. His hands work the clay as if it's an extension of his own skin, shaping the spinning form with steady, patient pressure. It's the woman beside him who catches your eye, her headscarf patterned with faded lotus flowers, her sleeves rolled up as she kneads a ball of dough on a low table. She looks up and grins when she sees you watching. "Not much of a surprise, is it?" she says. "A potter and a baker. We make things for holding and things for filling." She tells you her name is Tamari, and her husband, still shaping the clay, offers a brief nod before going back to his work. She dusts her hands with flour and gestures for you to sit on the overturned basket nearby. As she works the dough, she begins to tell her story. She was a baker's daughter from the market quarter. He was a potter's apprentice with a stall 2 lanes away. They met when she needed a jar for storing honey, and he happened to have one that was, according to him, the exact right size for love. She rolled her eyes at him then, but not enough to stop visiting his stall every week. The real turning point, she says, came during the festival of the inundation, when everyone gathered by the river to celebrate the Nile's flood. She baked a dozen small honey cakes, wrapped each in strips of papyrus, and for him, she wrote something extra. Just a line, tucked inside the folds, Your hands make better jars than my father's. She laughs as she remembers it, the sound as warm as the oven's breath. It was a silly thing to write, she admits. But he kept that scrap of papyrus. Still has it. The potter looks up from his wheel just long enough to nod. It's in my tool chest, he says simply, before bending back to his work. Tamri explains that after that day, she began slipping notes into more of her pastries, sometimes for friends, sometimes for family, sometimes just for the fun of it. It's not only for nobles, she says, shaping the dough into small discs. We have our own romances, our own little dramas. And sometimes the only way to speak them is through the taste of something sweet. She pulls a small clay dish from the shelf above her, one her husband made, and places the shaped dough onto it. We bake together now, she says, in our own way. I make the bread, he makes the dish. When I sell them at the market, people don't just get food, they get a place for it to belong. The smell of the baking bread begins to seep into the small room, and you can feel the quiet joy in this place. There's no rush here, no palace politics, no hidden intrigue. Just two people making things, side by side, in a rhythm they've built over years. She hands you one of the finished pastries when it's done, its crust a warm golden brown. You break it open and find a slip of papyrus folded inside, not with words, but with a tiny drawing, a jar, with steam curling from its mouth. She draws those sometimes, the potter says from his wheel. Little pictures instead of words. Some people can't read, but everyone can understand a drawing. You take a bite, the honey thick and fragrant, and realize that here, love letters aren't always written, they're baked into the bread, carved into the pottery, tucked into the spaces between work and rest. When you stand to leave, Tamri wipes her hands and says, "Tell people about us. Let them know that not all love stories belong in palaces." And as the golden light spills through the doorway, you promise her you will. The sun dips lower, and with it comes a shift in the air. The still heat gives way to a restless wind, a dry breath from the desert that feels as if it's carrying secrets. You find yourself on the edge of the village, where the homes thin out and the road becomes nothing more than a trail pressed into the earth. It leads west straight into the glare, where the sky is a pale, dusty gold. A small caravan is gathering there, 3 camels, 2 donkeys, and half a dozen people loading baskets and jars onto the animals' backs. One of them, a tall man with a sun-browned face and a scarf wrapped high over his nose, waves you over. "If you're heading for the next settlement," he says, "you'd better come with us. Desert wind's going to be bad tonight." You glance at the bundles they're tying down, and there, half hidden under a linen cover, you spot the telltale shine of glazed pottery jars, the kind used for transporting delicate goods. You know what's inside before you ask. "Pastries," the man confirms, his eyes crinkling with a hint of pride. "And letters. Can't have one without the other." He explains that his sister is a baker in Thebes, and she's been sending a package every month to her husband, who works at a quarry far across the desert. "She swears the honey keeps the bread soft," he says. "I think it's the love in the wrapping." You help them secure the loads, feeling the weight of each jar, surprisingly light, but carefully cushioned with straw. "If the jars break," he says, "the letter's ruined." "And if the letter's ruined," he shakes his head, "might as well not have baked the pastry at all." The caravan sets out just as the sun slips behind the horizon. The desert doesn't go dark all at once. It holds onto the light for a while, stretching the shadows until they blur into the sand. The wind picks up, hot and insistent, tugging at your clothes and carrying the faint scent of cumin from someone's evening cooking fire far behind you. You ride on a camel, its swaying gait forcing you into a rhythm that's oddly soothing. The others talk quietly, stories of past journeys, complaints about sand in places sand should never be, laughter at a memory of a courier once chased by a stubborn goat for 2 miles. After a while, the man with the scarf gestures toward the lead camel. See the rider in front? That's Salima. Best courier in the region. She's carried letters through sandstorms, across floods, even once through a locust swarm. Salima glances back and catches you looking. She gives a small nod and pats the jar tied to her saddle. These, she says simply, are worth more than gold. Gold you can weigh. Love you can't. Night comes fully now, the desert sky exploding into stars. Without the moon yet risen, the darkness is thick, and the only sounds are the creak of leather, the soft grunt of camels, and the hiss of wind skimming the dunes. The wind turns cooler, but it's a sharp coolness, not the gentle kind from the Nile. You wrap your scarf tighter, feeling the grit of sand on your lips. Salima pulls her own scarf up to cover her face completely, and you do the same. The smell of the pastries, subtle but present, somehow lingers even here, carried in brief gusts from the jars. Hours pass in that strange desert way, where time stretches and folds on itself. Eventually, the faint orange glow of a distant settlement appears on the horizon, flickering like a mirage. Salima pushes the pace, the camel's steps quickening in the sand. When you finally arrive, the air is still and heavy, as if the wind decided it wasn't welcome here. The courier delivers the jars into the hands of a man waiting in the shadows. He lifts the lid of one, breathes in deeply, and smiles, a small, private smile that needs no explanation. You realize, watching him, that the journey wasn't just about delivering pastries and letters. It was about making sure the feeling inside them survived the desert, still warm, still whole. And in that moment you know why people risk the sand, the wind, and the miles. Some messages are worth carrying across any distance. Morning in the settlement comes quietly, without the sudden blare of city markets. Here, the day begins with the soft scrape of brooms over stone, the muffled bray of a donkey, and the slow awakening of cooking fires. You wake to the faint smell of flour toasting in a pan, and somewhere nearby, the rhythmic thump of a pestle grinding seeds. Following the sound, you find yourself in a narrow courtyard where a woman is bent over a low table. Before her lies a small mound of wheat flour, a pinch of ground cumin, and something that glitters faintly in the early light, sesame seeds, freshly roasted. But what catches your attention most is the way she's writing. Not with ink, but with dough. She shapes each small roll into a slightly different form, some with a twist, others with a spiral. A few have tiny cuts along the edges. When you ask her why, she smiles knowingly. This, she says, holding up a twisted roll, means I miss you. And this, she lifts one with the little cuts, means I'm waiting. You realize she's making a code, one that could slip past any nosy guard or jealous rival. It started, she explains, when the overseers in the quarries began reading our letters. They said it was for security. Her voice dips into a dry chuckle. Security doesn't stop love. It just makes it smarter. She lays the pastries out in careful rows, speaking as she works. A single sesame seed in the center? That's yes. No seeds at all? No, 3 seeds in a triangle? That's for later, when you've known someone a long time. Her daughter, no more than 10, comes out carrying a shallow dish of date syrup. Together, they begin brushing the tops of the rolls, and the rich, dark scent rises into the warm air. You can see how each one, once baked, will glisten just enough to catch the light. They think they're just buying breakfast, the woman says, glancing toward the street where a man is waiting with a cloth sack. But the right person knows how to read the shapes. As she loads the rolls into the sack, you notice something else. Tiny marks scratched on the underside of each clay baking tray. My husband makes the trays, she explains. We use those marks for longer messages. You have to look after the bread is gone. You imagine a recipient miles away, flipping the tray after their meal to find a faint etching of a lotus flower or a moon, symbols carrying meanings older than the Pharaoh himself. The man with the sack pays and leaves, whistling as he disappears down the lane. The baker watches him go, then turns back to her work. They'll never stop watching our words, she says. So we make new words they can't read. A faint breeze stirs the air, carrying the scent of the baking bread over the rooftops. The little girl hums a tune as she brushes the last of the rolls, her movements precise, already learning the code without being told. You realize this isn't just baking. It's a language built from flour, seeds, and the quiet determination of people who refuse to let their voices be silenced. When you step back into the street, you can still smell the sesame and date syrup clinging to your sleeves. And you can't help wondering, how many coded messages are passing right now from oven to table, hidden in plain sight, waiting to be read by the right pair of eyes? By the time you leave the quiet settlement, the sky has shifted into that vivid, molten gold of early evening. The air is thick with the scent of lotus blossoms drifting in from the river, and in the distance, you hear something you haven't heard in days: music. At first, it's faint, a low pulse of drums, a bright ripple of flutes. But as you follow the sound down a sandy path lined with date palms, it swells into something jubilant. The trees open to reveal a wide riverside clearing, strung with garlands of flowers and linen streamers that flutter like pale fish in the breeze. You've stumbled into the festival of Opet. The crowd is a river of its own, flowing between stalls and canopies, pausing in eddies around dancers, surging toward the main platform where priests in immaculate white robes prepare for the evening procession. The smell here is dizzying: roasted lamb, fresh bread, honey wine, and beneath it all, the warm, spiced sweetness of pastries cooling in the open air. A boy darts past you carrying a basket, and you catch sight of what's inside: small, moon-shaped pastries glazed so that they shine under the torchlight. Each one is wrapped in a thin band of papyrus, tied with a bright strip of dyed reed fiber. You follow him to a low table where women are arranging the pastries in tall pyramids. For the prayers, one of them explains without looking up. Offer one to Ammonius, and he may grant you what you ask. Give one to a friend, and perhaps they will. The baskets fill quickly, and you notice something else. Some of the papyrus strips have writing on them. Not the neat hand of a temple scribe, but hurried, slanted script, as if written in a rush before the dough came out of the oven. A girl beside you whispers, "That one says, 'Come to the East Bank at dawn.'" She grins. The gods aren't the only ones getting messages tonight. As the drums pick up, a procession begins, musicians leading the way, followed by dancers with gold paint on their arms, moving in time to the rhythm. The air shakes with the beat, and the scent of the pastries seems to thicken as they're carried toward the temple steps. You take one from a passing tray, feeling the warmth still in its crust. The papyrus strip around it bears a single word: hope. You're not sure if it's meant for the gods or for you. All around, People are eating and laughing, pressing pastries into each other's hands like talismans. Lovers slip away toward the shadow of the palm groves, while elders sit in small circles, passing plates and murmuring blessings. The air hums with both devotion and mischief, the two mingling like cinnamon and honey. As the night deepens, the torches flare higher, and the drums slow into a heartbeat rhythm. People begin placing pastries at the feet of the temple's great statue, each offering catching the light on its glazed surface. Some kneel in prayer, others simply touch the stone and walk away, their eyes a little brighter. A woman near you breaks her pastry in half, eats one piece, and tosses the other into the river. "For luck," she says when she catches you looking. "And for someone far away." The current takes it gently, the glaze shimmering as it spins away into the dark. Standing there, you realize this festival isn't just about asking for blessings, it's about sending them, baked into something that will dissolve into the world as quietly as it was made. And somewhere in the mingling scents and sounds, you can feel it, the way love and faith sometimes use the same language. Tonight that language just happens to be sweet. The festival's music fades behind you as you follow a narrow, torchlit path that winds along the riverbank. The air is cooler now, carrying the sharp, clean scent of water and the deeper, damp smell of silt. Here, away from the noise, you can hear the occasional splash of a fish, the rustle of reeds leaning toward the current. A fisherman passes you, his net slung over one shoulder, a clay jar in his other hand. He gives you a nod before vanishing into the dark. The jar lingers in your mind, its rounded shape, the faint glint of glaze under the torchlight. Further ahead, the path bends toward a cluster of low buildings. One of them is half collapsed, its roof gone, walls leaning in on themselves. The air here is still, heavy with the smell of old dust and something faintly sweet, too faint for the festival's pastries, too deep for fresh bread. Curiosity tugs you forward. You duck under a leaning beam, stepping into what must once have been a storeroom. The floor is littered with broken pottery, fragments of woven baskets, and scraps of linen long turned brittle. And then you see it, a small box, wedged into a corner where the wall has crumbled. It's clay, with a simple lid, its surface dull under the grime of years. When you lift it, the faint smell intensifies, not fresh, but lingering, like a memory that refuses to fade. The lid sticks, but with a little pressure it comes free. Inside, wrapped in linen so fine it's nearly transparent, lies a single pastry. Or what remains of one. Time has hardened it into something more like stone, but you can still make out the careful spiral of its shape, the faint sheen of what must have been a glaze. Beneath it, folded tightly, is a piece of papyrus. The ink has bled in places, but you can still read enough to understand. It's a love letter. Not a grand, sweeping declaration, just a few lines. The writer speaks of the river's calm at night, the way the wind smells before rain, the feel of the pastry's warmth in their hands before they wrapped it. And then, a single line that makes your breath catch: "If you find this and I am gone, know that it was yours." The words are simple, almost shy, but in this small, silent place, they feel enormous. You glance at the hardened pastry again, and realize it was never meant to be eaten. It was meant to be kept, hidden away like a keepsake. You imagine the recipient. Did they put it here for safekeeping? Or did it arrive too late, left unopened until time and the river swallowed both the sender and the intended moment? A faint sound interrupts your thoughts, the quiet lap of water against stone. You step back outside, box still in hand, and see the Nile just a few paces away, the moon now high above it. The current glints in silver shards, each one catching the torchlight from the far shore. You set the box back where you found it. Some things, you decide, should stay where they've been waiting. The sweetness may be long gone, but the message, it's still here. Still whole. And as you walk away, the scent of it follows you, as if the pastry's memory is determined not to be forgotten. By the next morning, you've traded the hush of the riverside ruins for the dry, echoing cool of a stone colonnade. The shade feels like a blessing after so many hours in the sun, but it's not the architecture that's drawn you here, it's the voices. A group of scholars has gathered in the courtyard beyond, their linen robes neatly pressed, their reed pens tucked behind their ears like talismans. They're speaking in measured tones at first, but as you edge closer, the conversation sharpens, the cadence quickening. You catch a few key words: papyrus, honey, symbolism, and realize you've stumbled into an argument. One man, tall and narrow-faced, leans forward over the low table between them. The pastries were symbolic, he insists, his voice precise. They were offerings, tokens of devotion to the gods, not romantic gestures. Across from him, a woman with sun-browned skin shakes her head, smiling as though she's heard this all before. And yet, she counters, the letters clearly address living people. The gods don't need you to tell them your favorite shade of blue. Another man chimes in, rubbing his chin. Perhaps they were both. A dual-purpose gift, safe to present in public, but carrying a private meaning for those who understood. You settle onto a bench along the wall, pretending to study the carvings while listening unabashedly. The scholars begin citing examples, their voices overlapping. One recalls a tomb painting showing a woman offering a round cake to a man, a folded scroll beside it. Another describes a merchant's account mentioning pastries and words to sweeten the day. The tall man waves a hand dismissively. We project our modern notions of love onto the past. These could just as easily have been polite formalities. The woman leans back, folding her arms. Tell that to the scribe who compared a woman's voice to the taste of almond paste. Formality doesn't sound like that. The group laughs, though the tall man's smile is thin. A younger scholar, who's been quiet until now, clears his throat. There's also the matter of preservation, he says. Many letters were found still scented. That's deliberate. You don't scent something unless you want the memory to linger. They all pause at that, the air between them settling into a thoughtful silence. Finally, the tall man concedes with a slight shrug. Perhaps. But until we can read every letter ever written, the debate will remain. The woman grins. Good. If we solved everything, you'd all be out of work. They chuckle, the tension dissolving. Scrolls are rolled up, baskets closed, and the group begins to disperse, still trading half-serious jabs as they go. You remain seated, thinking about how even now, thousands of years later, the meaning of a simple pastry wrapped in papyrus can stir this much passion. It's strangely comforting. The past isn't just dates and kings and battles. It's also small arguments over love, food, and the spaces where the two overlap. As you step back into the sunlight, you catch a whiff of something sweet drifting from a nearby stall. For a moment, you almost expect to find a folded note tied to whatever's baking, but no, not this time. Some mysteries, you think, are meant to be left half-answered, if only so we keep asking. The afternoon heat has mellowed into a soft haze when you reach a small dock at the quieter end of the river. A few boats are moored there, rocking gently, their hulls knocking softly against the worn wood. You notice a man sitting alone on the edge of the dock, his back curved, his feet dangling just above the water. Beside him is a small woven basket covered with linen. He doesn't look up when you approach, but his voice reaches you anyway, low, almost like he's talking to himself. It never made it. He lifts the linen to reveal a single pastry, still wrapped in a neat strip of papyrus. The glaze is dulled, the edges just beginning to go stale. You can smell the honey, faint but stubborn, clinging to the air between you. This was meant for her, he says, eyes fixed on the pastry. I was to meet the courier at the East Bank 2 days ago. But there was a sandstorm. The boat couldn't cross. He explains that the letter inside is short, just enough to say he'd be waiting, just enough to let her know she was remembered. It's nothing and everything, he adds, his voice catching a little. You ask why he hasn't eaten it. He shakes his head. It's hers. Even if she never holds it. There's a stillness in the moment that feels heavy, like the air itself is holding its breath. The water laps quietly at the dock, and somewhere upriver, a bird calls out once, then falls silent. He tells you they've been exchanging these little packages for over a year. She sends one with a note about her day. He sends one with a note about his. Sometimes the words are trivial, sometimes they're not. But the pastries are always there, carrying the scent of home to wherever the other happens to be. This is the first one she won't get, he says softly. Feels wrong, doesn't it? Like a sentence without the last word. You watch as he wraps the linen back over the basket and ties it carefully, as though that act alone might keep the pastry safe. He doesn't say what he'll do with it, and you don't ask. Some choices aren't for outsiders to hear. Instead, you sit beside him for a while, the two of you watching the slow drift of the current. The Nile moves the way time does when you don't want it to, steady, indifferent, carrying everything forward whether you're ready or not. At one point, the man reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small scrap of papyrus, blank. He dips a reed pen into a tiny pot of ink and writes a single word, someday. Then he slips it under the linen, beside the pastry. It's quiet again. The only movement is the river, the only sound the creak of the dock. And when you finally stand to leave, he doesn't look up, just keeps his eyes on the water, as if waiting for something that may never come but is worth waiting for anyway. Evening comes slow and honey-thick, the sky melting from gold to violet as the river drinks the last of the light. You follow the bank until the houses thin out entirely, replaced by open fields of papyrus swaying in the breeze. The air here is cooler, sweeter, touched with that faint green scent plants give off after sunset. You stop where the bank curves gently outward, a natural seat in the earth where the view stretches for miles. The water glimmers with the reflection of the first stars, and for a while, you just watch it flow, steady, patient, the same river that has carried every letter, every pastry, every secret in this story. Somewhere behind you, a night bird calls, its voice low and unhurried. It reminds you of the way the bakers spoke when telling their stories, without rush, as if the words knew they'd arrive exactly when they were supposed to. The air still holds traces of everything you've passed through, the heady spice of the festival, the resin and honey perfume of the palace archives, the warm yeasty breath of a village oven. Each scent carries with it a moment, and each moment is anchored to a face, a voice, a feeling. You think about the royal baker who risked a banquet to slip a note inside one perfect pastry. About Tamri and her potter husband, shaping dough and clay with the same quiet devotion. About the courier crossing the desert, guarding jars of sweetness against the wind. About the scribe who spiced other people's words until they were rich enough to last. And maybe most of all, about the man on the dock, holding on to a pastry that would never reach its destination. The breeze picks up, brushing the papyrus stalks until they whisper like an audience leaning in to hear the last line. The sound blends with the river's hush, and you realize you've reached the quiet edge of the tale, where there are no more twists or discoveries, just the slow settling of what you've already seen. The Nile keeps moving, the stars keep brightening, and the smells of the day fade into the cool of night. You lean back on your hands, watching the current pull thin ribbons of moonlight downstream, until the shapes of boats and banks dissolve into darkness. Your eyelids grow heavy. The details blur. The shine of a honey glaze becomes the shimmer of water. The curl of steam from an oven becomes the curl of mist off the river. Even the sounds soften, as though the world is drawing a blanket over itself. And somewhere in the blur between waking and sleep, you can almost taste it, a bite of something warm and sweet, carrying the faint trace of words meant just for you. End of script. Sweet dreams.